All right, welcome to War Media Bears Recap. I am Saul Rodriguez, joined by my war colleague Joe Tanksley, and free agency is officially underway. The Bears are going off. Honestly, I mean, you better watch your back, Joe, because I think the Bears might sign you without you even knowing. They might.
You
They
know
honestly
what?
might.
Maybe last year I had a shot, but with some of the guys that they put out there, you know, but like this year they kind of stepping up in class a little bit,
Yeah,
and it's been kind of interesting to see who the Bears have signed and who they have not signed,
yeah.
and I think it's kind of telling, for how Ryan Poles is going to pursue rebuilding this team, with the decisions that he's made so far in free agency. So, some definitely some head scratchers and a lot of questions to asked and answered, but so far so good. I think he's got some good value. I think which is the key. He's got some good value with these free agent signings, and I think the Bears are headed in the right direction.
No, yeah, 100%. Look, I look at some of these signings too, yeah, and it's odd to see positive Bears free agents signing. Like it's just weird compared to like other years that you're just like they're signing who? Like, it's like at least guys we know, and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So but anyways, let's go through like some of the ones that they have signed. I know not all, I think not all of them on this list are confirmed. I know TJ Edwards for sure is confirmed, the Illinois native, the linebacker. He's here. Another linebacker in Tremaine Edmonds as well. He's 24. He's a two-time Pro Bowler. You got Nate Davis coming from the Titans. Then you have defensive end Demarcus Walker, 28-year-old from the Titans. Pair of running backs actually. Travis Homer for 1.5 million. And then it just broke right now. Me and Joe were talking about it before we came on that Adam Schefter just announced that we signed Deontay Freeman, the running back, who's also he was on the Titans last year, right? Or am I getting that wrong? No,
No,
Carolina,
Dante
or
Foreman.
Dante Foreman. My bad. Dante
Yeah.
Foreman, the running back from the Carolina Panthers. And then also we got the quarterback from the Panthers as well, and PJ Walker he's going to be our new backup because I know the Bears I think it was just today that they released Trevor Siemian. They also signed a defensive tackle Andrew Billings, and then also again just minutes ago they announced that they signed Robert Tonyan, the tight end who has spent the last 5 seasons, his first 5 seasons in the NFL with the Green Bay Packers. So yeah, so I mean they're going out signing a bunch of guys. So I kind of wanted to get your take on: did you expect these types of signings? Did you expect this amount? A lot of people were saying, oh, they're going to sign some big names, and they have signed, like I said, Tremaine Edmonds and stuff like that. But is this better than you thought, or is this one of those things where you're riding the high and you're waiting until like maybe there's going to be another big signing coming up?
You know what? I can't even kind of describe it as riding a
Mm-hmm.
high,
Mm-hmm.
but I will say I am intrigued, and I will say I'm a little bit excited. I
Mm-hmm.
think, like most people, the problem is that the Bears have so many needs and so many holes to fill, and a lot of times as fans, you want them to just jump in and just fill them all as quickly as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and that did not happen. And I understand it to a degree because you know a lot of times teams get into trouble, especially you can really screw up a rebuild by signing guys to bad contracts and overpaying guys too
Mm-hmm.
early in the stage. I think with the signings that they have made, when you talk about, Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, these are the guys that are still in the prime of their career. And, you know, versus somebody like a Javon Hargraves who's, 30 plus. You know what I'm saying? You talk about Tremaine Edmonds, he's 24 years old, he's gonna be 25 in May. He's already played 5 years in the league. He was a 19-year-old rookie. Think about that, starting. So he's been calling signals from the defense, since he was a teenager, professionally. And then you have a player like TJ Edwards, who's, you know, played on that monster defense in Philadelphia, and he's has experience calling signals as well, and being in the middle and anchoring that defense. And he's been a part of some big plays in Philadelphia. I think that the guys that they signed are young and still hungry and on the upside and have an upward trajectory. They're not on the downspan of their career. So I think that's kind of how they fit in the timeline of this rebuild. Like I said previously, they weren't going to be able to answer all these questions this year. It's just too many holes to fill, and I think it's going to take a little bit of patience on the fans' part. I don't think Ryan Poles is going to put himself in a position to spend bad money, in a situation where, the team's not quite ready to be, it's not a quite championship ready team. So I kind of, I tend to agree with the pragmatic approach that he's taking. So I am excited about Jermaine Edmonds. I know a lot of people are criticizing, his playing career is, him not making enough of splash plays with Buffalo, and that's why they let him walk. And a lot of people, like rightfully so, are comparing him to Roquan Smith. And right now Roquan Smith is I can't say arguably, he is a better football player than Jermaine Edmonds. But when you talk about fit for a system and what you're going to be able to do, which is a cover two base system, when you ask your linebackers to cover a lot, Jermaine Edmonds, trends highly in that direction and being able to do that, at 6'5", 250, and being able to run like the wind. People forget, like when the Buffalo came to Chicago, or Buffalo and Chicago played each other, Jermaine Edmonds was spying Justin Fields. And he caught him a couple times, Yeah. And so you put him in the middle of this defense, with TJ Edwards, you got a capability, of eliminating some mismatches on defense coverage wise, which puts them in a more advantageous position defensively, especially with the way teams like scheme people open and run RPA and so many option routes. It's going to be helpful to have linebackers that can cover. Most people wanted the D tackle, a D tackle. I think they had Jones, Draymond Jones, and Javon Hargraves, so the Bears did not sign. And I think in a situation with Hargraves coming from Philly going to San Francisco, the Bears and San Francisco are in two different positions. San Francisco is a team that's trying to win a championship, and the Bears are rebuilding. And, with Hargreaves being 30 years old, he just didn't fit in the timeline. So you really can't, spend half of your cap, paying for a guy like that when it's not going to be worth it. The value's just not there. Matt McGlinchey, they went in on Matt McGlinchey, when he got outbid, by the Denver Broncos. So I think, sometimes that just happens, but I'm excited for the future. I think free agency has been solid so far for the Bears. So I'm pleased.
Yeah, and you make some great points in the fact that, like, obviously this is not a Super Bowl ready team or anything, like a playoff team ready just yet. They need a lot of time. I think, and we talked about it a lot, like, in the offseason, or sorry, before the offseason, right? That, like, even if the Bears go off in signing all these players, which like they are right now, like you can't expect results right away, especially because you need guys to mellow together and stuff like that. But hey, I mean, I will say this. I have seen a couple odds on the NFC North, and I did see one. I can't pull it up, so if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I did see one where it had like the NFC North, the best odds coming into March. The Lions have the best odds, and then the Bears were second. But I did check right now.
Yeah,
again.
I think the Bears are tied.
Yeah. So at least, so I was gonna say I couldn't find that one I was looking for, but on oddschecker.com, they have the Vikings at second with plus 280. Then they have the Bears at 330. But either way, still a long way to go. But, as you were talking about, with Jermaine Edmonds, they even asked Poles today too there, because Poles did kind of, I think, allude to the fact that Edmonds is going to fit this Matt Eberflus system better, or like not better, but he kind of like made it seem like that's what he was saying. And they asked him, they're like, oh, like, why do you think he's going to, be a better, asset to Eberflus's defense? And he didn't really compare, because he said, they asked him, oh, how is he going to be better than Roquan Smith and all that? But he didn't want to compare the two. But, it's like one of those things where, because obviously a lot of people were wondering, like, why not extend Roquan Smith if you have all this money, blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
We have been talking about that. So, yeah, I mean, I will say this. I am delighted with that signing of Tremaine Edmonds. I keep saying Edwards. And, hopefully it works out in that
See, the names
aspect.
are too similar, Edmonds and
Yeah,
Edwards. You
I
got to
know,
get
right?
used to it.
Ed, right? Yeah, yeah, it's true, it's true. But,
We got
no.
Ed and Ed. We got Ed and Ed.
Yeah,
Ed and Eddie. Ed and Eddie.
Eddie. Great show, great show. No, yeah, but and other things too that like I like that they're signing a lot, they're adding a lot of depth, right? Because I mean, I think it's one of the most important things in sports, right? Adding depth and like you got guys like Homer and of course reportedly like Dante Foreman and all that, and as well with the quarterback position with PJ Walker because PJ Walker obviously knows DJ Moore, right? So because they were on the same team. What do you think about a signing like that? I think that's a kind of like those low key signings that people don't really talk about. That it's not going to get a lot of time on TV, but I think it might help. The Bears and Fields and Moore and all that, right?
Here's the thing: in the NFL, backup quarterbacks play.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen it with San Francisco. We've seen it with the Bears. We've seen it throughout the league. Backup
Mm-hmm.
quarterbacks play. And PJ Walker, with Carolina last year, had a decent season and showed up big in some spots, and made some big time plays for the Panthers. I think, it puts the Bears in a position where, you can bring in a guy and not necessarily have to change the whole offense, right away. And then, you also have a backup quarterback who has some rapport with your number one receiver now. So that is a tremendous win. Backup quarterback is one of the most important positions, even though they don't play a lot, but they do play. And sometimes, depending on where you are in your season, when you have, when the backup quarterback, quarterback comes in, it can wreck or change the season, depending, how good they are. So I think this was definitely a positive signing for the Bears. Which is kind of retooling on the fly. I didn't mention it earlier, but the Bears also let go of well, not let go, but they didn't bring back David Montgomery.
Mm-hmm.
He goes with the Detroit Lions, and so like I said before, it's interesting who they signed and did not sign. And I know we were talking about the quarterback. It just kind of popped in my mind, but
no, yeah, I was going to ask you about that anyway.
Right. So like it's just going, it's just interesting where it's going. It's, like I said, they have so many needs that they need to fill.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And they got decent draft capital now. They still got a lot of money. So and people are excited, to talk about it, and still scratching their heads about what's going to happen next.
Plenty of positive tweets on that signing. Will DeWitt from CHGO said, surely he can help Fields get acclimated to DJ Moore with his experience. But yeah, no, you're right. And that's what, and you talked about David Montgomery, so I'll ask you about it now. But what did you think about that signing, especially for the amount? We kind of talked about it before we came on, but the amount, it just, not only the amount that he got paid, but just the amount that all running backs are paid. You made a point to that. But, with David Montgomery signing, he signed a 3-year deal, $18 million. I think it was like 11 million guaranteed with the Lions. Well, yeah, what did you think about that deal?
You know what? I mean, it was interesting. It was interesting to me because I didn't know that running back was even going to be a position on the Detroit Lions radar. But he's clearly somebody that they value, the one to bring in. They let Jamal Williams go. He signed someplace else for like $12 million, which was less than David Montgomery. So it kind of just tells you what the league values David Montgomery at, and how other teams feel about him, especially winning your division. It didn't seem like a lot of money. It's definitely something that the Bears could have afforded that number, and it just boils down to he didn't fit anymore. So it's going to be real interesting. I think that's one of the things that fans are probably going to have a hard time with. As far as this free agency period, and what people are wondering now, which is the next step, like when are we going to start signing the rest of our guys like Cole Kmet and Jalen Johnson? I think Mooney's due up to be extended as well. But we still got some of our own guys that we need to bring back in that I feel like are still valuable and have a place on this team. So that's just the next head scratcher and the next shooter drop. Like, who is Ryan Poles going to get done first as far as Cole Kmet or Jalen Johnson? Does Jalen, where are the numbers at with Jalen Johnson? Is he going to be, paid like a top corner, or, is he willing to give a hometown discount? Like, these are things that we need to answer. And like, corner is a premium position. Jalen Johnson is good at it. He was one of your best players on defense last year, and I I think that's probably the next shoe to drop. You got to get that done, especially since we didn't go out and get a tackle or edge rusher at free agency. Well, you got one. You got the guy from Tennessee. But, that's not a big splash. You know what I mean? So I think you gotta lock up Jalen Johnson for that defense.
No, you're right. And yeah, looking at Jalen Johnson, he's owed a little under $3 million this year, and then he's a free agent. So yeah, they got to make a move on that quick if they want to, sign him. I think he deserves that, especially with with the new regime and all that and what he's done for the Bears. And yeah, I mean, it's you're right. You make a good point. It's something that I think a lot of people can get caught up with, the whole free agent signings and like how those are positive. And I think that they don't think about like how the guys that those guys like TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds, like they come to this team and they see a nucleus with Fields and Herbert, etc. Right. And like, they like that. So you don't want to like separate that. You don't want to hurt that because, they, whatever they started, you got to move on to the new players. But kind of speaking as to, what's next and what people have been talking about in general, with the running back position, I know the Bears have added a couple running backs reportedly, with Homer and Deontay Foreman, but there's been some talk about because Austin Ekeler, he wants out of the Chargers. Is that something you think is just all all talk of like the Bears being, the Bears might be a top? I know this. I forgot who it was that had a list for likely places that Ekeler could go, and I think the Bears were at the top. So do you think that's something the Bears should do? That something you want, or just something that's not likely to happen?
Again, if the Bears were in a different space of time and just rebuild and they were trying to go for a championship, I think Austin Ekeler would make sense. But at 29 years old and being a running back, no.
And the fact that he's injury prone too, is injury prone too as well.
Yeah, no. I think he's been a phenomenal player, for the Chargers. He's done a lot of damage for them. But his best years are behind him. He's 29 years old, and by the time the Bears are actually, really competing, they'll be better this year. But when they're really, really competing, and hopefully Justin Fields is taking that next step to being one of the best quarterbacks in the league, that's when you make a move like that. It's not time for, to bring in a guy like Austin Ekeler right now. If I would bring in somebody, that's kind of on the tail end that might have a little bit left of the tank, I would tend to do that on the defensive side of the ball, especially on the defensive line. You're going to be bringing in, some guys, in the draft. They got the ninth pick. They got the 2 second-round picks, a third-round pick. So they got a chance to draft some, pretty decent players that are probably going to start for them, more than likely, being drafted that high. Bringing a veteran, who on a prove-it deal, might be beneficial, to kind of teach the young kids how to go about bringing being a pro. Maybe a guy like, Frank Clark, maybe Jadeveon Clowney. If you're going to bring in somebody 9 years old and 30 years old, bring them in on the 1 2 year deal, prove-it deal, and let them mentor some of your young guys. While they don't have to play that much, you can use them in limited fashion. Somebody like Austin Ekeler, I think, will cost too much. One, and they're just not in that timeline.
Yeah, no, you brought up some good points, and it's one of those things too, where like I said before, them signing those running backs already may have just answered the question for us, right? And the fact that they might just write it out with Herbert as the number one, and then have those guys as with Homer and Foreman. So which I like those guys. I mean, seeing those guys play, Homer played a few games over there in Seattle. Plenty of games where you can see what kind of running back he is. Same with Foreman as well in Carolina. So I like those signings as well. But one more question before we go. I did want to ask you about the Aaron Rodgers circus, man. What's going on over there? With with Green Bay, and it's just so much is happening. So I don't know, like what you've heard and what you haven't, but I mean, just with the whole, he's going on a retreat, coming back. He was like 90% retirement, 10% keep playing, and then he said on Wednesday on a podcast that he plans to play for the Jets, something like that. So yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts so far on that, and how do you think it's gonna go?
Well, here's the thing. Good riddance. You know what? Here's the thing. Like, here's the thing. I can acknowledge Aaron Rodgers, greatness, but as of late, he's been so full of himself and so smug about things. It kind of just puts a tarnish, on his greatness, with some of the things that he's said and done over the last couple of seasons and the way he's handled himself in Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
I am one of those fans who, wanted to the Bears to beat him and end his
Mm-hmm.
career.
Yeah.
Like I'm one of those guys. You know what I'm saying? So like that's kind of how I feel. Kind of like who's the guy that we drafted? What's that dude's name? I can't even remember his name, but we drafted him instead of Chandler Jones.
I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, Steve McClellan.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, who ended up, breaking Brett Favre. Saying when he was with the Minnesota Vikings, and that was kind of it for Brett Favre. But I kind of wanted one of those scenarios with the Bears and Aaron Rodgers,
Mm-hmm.
still in Green Bay, but it's not going to happen. And I think without Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers gives the team a chance to win. That's just how he good, how good he is at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it definitely makes the road in the NFC North a little bit easier. And, with him gone, it kind of like maybe help to speed up this rebuild a little bit more. If you can, come into a situation, like you said, the Bears are, the second favorite to win a division, tied with Minnesota this year. So, with him gone, the Bears would be in the position, to possibly get to the, and quite frankly, they probably would have been in the position, to get to the playoffs with him still there. But it makes that road a little bit easier with him gone. I don't know. I think, Green Bay is in a situation where they're ready to get rid of him. They're sick of his antics, and it's just, a matter of fact to, where, the New York Jets could, come up with something that's going to be of value for Green Bay to make it happen, because Green Bay is in no rush. They can sit on this as long as they want, so, I don't think, the Jets have much leverage in this situation. It's really, if you really want them, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I kind of was thinking kind of how you were saying about, you wanted to beat him, you wanted to end his career, if he stayed in Green Bay. I kind of wanted that too. I'm like, that's kind of the only negative about him leaving is like I wanted to beat him. I get an opportunity to beat him with like this, up and coming Bears team, whatever. But it is what it is. And
it's like right. It's like Ric Flair says, to beat a man, you got to beat the man. You know what I'm saying? And I wanted the Bears to beat the man. You know what I'm saying? So,
No, yeah, I agree. That's what I was
going
saying.
around with that championship belt for a while, doing the discount double check with the championship belt.
Yeah.
He thought he was Ric Flair for a little bit, so I wanted the Bears to beat the man, and now he's running away.
Exactly. Yeah, no, yeah, I know. And you are right though, going back to what you said about the Jets and if they want how much do they want them? Yeah, and that's what a lot of people think is going on right now is that the reason the deal's not done yet is because Aaron Rodgers is kind of maneuvering this to get exactly what he wants back from the Jets to the Packers. It's kind of like a favor almost, I guess you could say. And also he wants everything to be set for when he gets to the Jets. But, who knows how much of that is true, but it's going to be interesting when it goes down. I mean, the Jets are going to be in a solid position if they get him for sure. I mean, I think it's also funny is what's coming up, all the memes with Zach Wilson because of what he said last year. They were like, oh, what are you going to do with the guy that comes in and going to try to take your job or whatever? And he's just like, I'm going to make his life hell every day in practice. And if it's Aaron Rodgers, good luck. Because that's not going to happen.
Right. Good luck. Good luck.
That is not going to happen. But yeah, hopefully, that issue is not overshadowed or is overshadowed by something the Bears do still later on this week. Who knows, right? The week's not over. They might end up, free agency still going. So hopefully, going strong. But Joe, thanks for coming on with me today. And that does it for another episode of the Bears recap for War Media. I am Saul Rodriguez along with my colleague Joe Tanksley. Until next time, guys.